Shabbat, Shuvah, Shalom. We can do that, right? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about this week's Torah portion. It's Vayelech. It is Deuteronomy chapter 31. It is the shortest Torah portion in the whole Torah, which, if you're a B'nai Mitzvah student, you feel really lucky that you got this one, as opposed to me, who was assigned Mitzorah, which is about leprosy. And that's why I dropped out of Hebrew school. Just kidding. So, I like to embarrass the other rabbis. It's what I do best. So this Torah portion, we see Moses nearing the end of his life, and Moses is in a really, really bad space. He has spent the last 40 years with this people that fetch and complain all the time, always want something different than what they have. He's also dealing with God, who is constantly telling him what to say, how to say it, when he should scold the people, when he should make the people celebrate, anything in between. And here we find Moses at 120 years old, may we all be so lucky, that he's telling all of Israel, literally, I can no longer be active, which, again, may all of us be so lucky to get to 120, to have that be our, I'm done being active now. So what he does is he talks to all the people. He's preparing for his death. He appoints Joshua, who was chosen by God to succeed him. And so he tells the people, Joshua's going to lead you across the Jordan. It's no big deal. God will cross first. Joshua will follow, and then you'll follow him. You're in good hands. Don't worry about it. He reminds the people that God will be with them when they're going into the promised land. And Moses says, be strong and resolute. Be not in fear or in dread of them, for Adonai your God marches with you and will not fail you or forsake you. He then repeats this entire line to Joshua in front of everyone. He has Joshua come up. He's already in front of everybody, already talking, already saying this to all the people. And he asks Joshua to come up, and then he says that specifically just to Joshua in front of everybody, which I just find interesting. As this short Torah portion continues, we also find out this is when the Torah gets written down. The ancient rabbis argue about this, if it's the whole Torah, if it's just the book of Deuteronomy, if it's just the Torah up until this moment in the Torah. There's a lot of debate about it, but the point is something is written down and it's given to the priests and the elders, and they are told to teach it, read the whole thing every 7 years at Sukkot. That's a conversation for another time. I just found that interesting. And then God pulls Moses aside and says, FYI, the people are going to screw up in the promised land. They're going to worship other gods. They're going to forsake me. They're going to break my covenant. And you know what? I'm going to abandon them. That's what God says. God says they're going to mess up and I'm going to abandon them. I'm going to hide from them and they are going to suffer. So this is obviously a really great pep talk. So Moses doesn't worry about his people. But God does tell them they will eat their fill and grow fat. So he's saying that because things are going to be so good in the promised land, the people will forget how they got there and who got them there. So God also instructs Moses to write down a poem and teach it to the Israelites. It's almost over. I told you it's the shortest portion. It's getting there. So Moses writes down this poem to teach to the Israelites that basically is saying, you're going to screw up and it's going to be bad. Again, I also think this is a weird pep talk, before going into battle, but, it's what God told Moses to do. So then it's God who talks to Joshua this time and says the same thing Moses said to the people and that Moses said to Joshua before, be strong and resolute. It's the third time it happens in this portion. He says, for you, Joshua, shall bring the Israelites into the land that I promised them on oath, and I will be with you. I just think it's pretty weird since God had just told Moses, separately from Joshua, that the people were going to go astray and things were going to be bad. But it's nice that God wanted to, help Joshua feel good about going into the new land. So why tell you all of that about the portion? There's a lot going on in this one chapter. And I kind of wondered why did God just tell Joshua to be strong and resolute? If God knew the people were going to mess up, why didn't he prepare Joshua in some way or have Joshua figure out a way to be a better leader? But as we learned from having watched Moses all of this time, there really wasn't so much individual awareness. There wasn't so much, leadership was pretty much doing what God had told the people to do. Moses would ask for forgiveness on all the people's behalf. The priests would make sacrifice on everyone's behalf. Yom Kippur back then was, releasing the scapegoat with everyone's sins, and that was that. Doesn't that sound nice? Wouldn't that be good to not have to, think about all the horrible things you did? Too bad we have to. Okay. So there was no concept of Shuvah, of repentance on a personal level. There wasn't this idea of cheshbon hanefesh, this idea of taking an accounting for the soul. There was only really this level between having someone be your intermediary between you and God to say you're sorry. So what really struck me here is I was pretty hard on Moses, as I was telling Rabbi Bowman before the service. I was like, why? He is such a jerk. Here he is. He spent his whole life. Why didn't he, think about, he knew that he wasn't going to get into the land. He knew he was going to get the people to the edge and then be done. What is it that he wanted to accomplish in that time? He had the time to actually think about what he wanted to do between point A and point Z. But again, Moses didn't have the opportunity to really have that sense of self-reflection. So on Shabbat Shuvah, we read this portion, but Shabbat Shuvah wasn't Shabbat Shuvah in Moses' day. It was another Shabbat. It was the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were very different. But so we read this portion here on Shabbat Shuvah, right before Yom Kippur, where we are going to dress in white, which is reminiscent of the shrouds in which Jews are traditionally buried. We emulate corpses by not eating, not drinking, freed of the body. And this will one day be our fate. And this is what Moses is facing in this portion. He knows it's the end of the line. He's facing his mortality, just like we are supposed to do at this time of year. So even though, like I said, he knew this time was coming, he hadn't really evaluated what it was he wanted to accomplish in his life other than bring the Israelites to the promised land, as God had instructed him to do. So all he's able to do is make everybody write stuff down so it'll be read after he's gone. And I also think it's funny that he also then writes this poem, which is next week's Torah portion. That's pretty much everything's going to be terrible, so they can read it later and be like, oh, Moses was right. We were going to be awful. Don't do that to your family. It's not a good way to go. And he chooses his successor, but really God's doing that. But Shabbat Shuvah, this gift we have in front of us tonight, the Shabbat and tomorrow, is a gift that the Israelites didn't have. And really the whole High Holy Day season wasn't what it is today. We have these days that we're in the middle of right now where we are able to deeply look into our souls, to go through this process of cheshbon hanefesh, taking an accounting of our souls, thinking of all the great things we did, all the bad things we did, and all of the things in between, so that we can actually reflect, unlike Moses was able to, and say, where do we want to get to at the end of our life? Hopefully it will be long, but who do we want to be? How do we want to be remembered? And just because I am now running the religious school, if you haven't heard, thinking about this in an educational sense, there is an educational philosophy called backwards design, where you begin with the end in mind. Moses didn't have the opportunity to do this. This was not what the purpose of the High Holy Days was in Moses' time, but it is for us. So we think about, what do we want the end to look like? Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about this, beginning with the end in mind. He says it means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going so that you better understand where you are now, so that the steps you are to take are always in the right direction, so you know where you're headed. Like I said, Moses did not have this gift, but we do. It's a constant process. Who do you want to be? What do you want to accomplish? What are your top values or goals for yourself, for your family, for your community? Moses didn't have this space or opportunity, and it left him bitter at the end. And that is why this phrase, be strong and resolute, be strong and determined, be strong and purposeful, that's why it's repeated 3 times in this portion. Because while facing our mortality is hard, while putting the work in to try to change who we are, to make that turn that we're told to make on Shabbat Shuvah and during the whole High Holy Day season, it's exhausting. And because closing the gap between who we currently are and who we are meant to be means failing and falling over and over. So if we know we're going to fail, and if God knows we're going to fail, like God knew the Israelites were going to fail, the message of this Torah portion and the message of Shabbat Shuvah is don't give up. It may take time. You may find yourself, as Rabbi Bowman spoke about cycles earlier, you may find yourself making the same mistakes again and again. But if we are strong and we are resolute, we can make sure that we become the people we're meant to be, and therefore also help others become the people they're meant to be, and hopefully make this world a place that we're all proud to be in. So Shabbat Shuvah Shalom. Wish you a good turning as we head into Yom Kippur on Tuesday night.